Hip politics, baby.
Welcome back, listeners. Welcome back. It's another episode of the Hip Politics Podcast. The Candidates Edition, aka We Running. We here with another amazing candidate of the hip hop generation, brother that I've known of from afar, been able to watch some of his work, was able to work closely in the White House with his wife. They are two administration household in a sense, but really just public servants at heart. And when we were putting this series together, he was definitely one of the first people I was like, yeah, we got to have a conversation with this brother. He's running to represent Alabama's newly formed District 2 in the great state of Alabama. I want my Hip Politics Podcast and Hip Politics family to welcome Shomari Figures to the Hip Politics Podcast. What's up, Shomari? How you doing, man?
Man, doing well, man. Thankful for the opportunity to be here, man.
Thank you, man. I want to jump right in. You're running in a newly formed district in Alabama. There's a lot to unpack there because I think a lot of people don't realize that Alabama has a newly formed district. I think there's if they are paying attention, just unfortunately, I got, like we were just talking off camera, like I've got a lot of family in Alabama, so I'm deeply invested in the state. But I know a lot of people may not so much know as much about Alabama or the great cities of Mobile, Montgomery, Huntsville, other than the Montgomery, the waterway, the riverboat, Juneteenth, get back. But other than that, in all seriousness, like this is I think a very dynamic and interesting opportunity in time with a newly redrawn district, specifically, as I understand it, specifically to allow for more black representation or potential for more black representation in the state that has been historically where black folks have just been disenfranchised, considering how much and how large of a population we are in that state. And you decided you've got a deep family history in the state and also in representative and elected politics in the community, and we just want to dive into a lot of that. But I'm going to start off with a simple question is, Shomari Figures, why are you running? What's your why?
Oh, man. It's that's the question we seem to get first in all of these interviews, man. But for me, it boils down to the fact that this newly reformed district, it includes home, right? Like it's home for me. This is the place I was born. I was born in Mobile, Alabama, raised in Mobile, educated in Mobile, grew up there. It shaped me, it molded me, it crafted me into the person that I am today. The community as a whole, because I don't just view coming up in that environment, as I'm sure you're familiar with your family. It was from Alabama. There's that old saying that it takes a village, man, and that's my village. District 2 is my village. And when you sit back and look at life, I think at some point, most people, I think, ask the question of themselves, what can I do to best utilize my skills, my experiences, resources for the greatest benefit of the people and the communities and the places that matter most to me? And I view Congress as a place of, despite all of the noise you hear around a lot of the national issue, I really view Congress as a place where there's so much good that can actually happen, because they are the entity that funnels many, if not most, of the resources that come into this district that can be used to create more healthcare access, revitalize our education system, both in how we are paying teachers and how we are modernizing our academic infrastructure throughout the state and throughout this district. And so the why for me is that, look, I've had the opportunity and the privilege really to work in all three branches of federal government. I've seen how this government works, how it can work. I've learned the ins and outs of how the federal government can really be leveraged to bring forth real tangible impact throughout communities. And I think this affords the chance for me to be able to take that and focus on a communities in the state of Alabama that have for far too long not been a priority or a focus for people in elected positions, not just at the federal level, but throughout some of these communities. And so people really are excited about having that opportunity at the federal level for representation to really prioritize them and focus them and really drive some change in the district.
A lot there. I think I'm in total agreement that Congress, even though it may seem broken right now, is definitely maybe not as efficient and as smooth working as it has been in the past. It's the faucet. There's trillions of dollars that are allocated every year. Millions, billions and millions that are going state by state and feed a lot of programs. It's the federal programs and opportunity that can flow from there. Something I don't take for granted people understand just the ins and outs of elected politics or gerrymandering and district lines and so forth. That's what the platform is really meant to really bring people back into this process. Can you explain how this newly formed District 2, came about? It's a newly redrawn district. Like I said, there's news that this is meant to be able to help get hopefully more black representation, to be more equitable and representative of the population that is actually in the state. But can you talk about that? Explain to our listeners just what District 2 is, why there's a new district.
Yeah, look, the process of gerrymandering is something that takes place across the country, and it's essentially usually after a census. In this case, the 2020 census, the state legislatures go back and they redraw districts, both state districts as well as the congressional districts. And in this case, after the 2020 census, the state of Alabama redrew their maps, and they drew them in such a way that condensed the black voting population into several areas that only allowed for black candidates to have what they call what the court refers to as an opportunity to elect a candidate of their choice in one district. And that's the district that's currently represented and has been for a little over a decade now represented by Congresswoman Terry Sewell. And some individuals and organizations felt that the state of Alabama had essentially racially gerrymandered, where they basically split the voting power in a way that would dilute the impact of the black vote across multiple congressional districts, and as opposed to putting enough blacks in multiple districts where they could have a legitimate expectation to impact the outcome of an election and select a candidate of their choice. As opposed to doing that, carved them up in a way that only really allowed them to have significant influence and elect a candidate of their choice in one district, and that is Terry Sewell's district. And so a lawsuit was filed. Several lawsuits were actually filed by different plaintiffs groups and under a few different legal theories, but all essentially arguing the same thing, that this was illegal, that this is a violation of federal law and or the Constitution. And so the court went through several hearings and did what many were surprised to see them do.
I was about to say, just because I have experience of this in Texas, working for Eddie Bernice Johnson years ago, and how we were constantly in court, like over district lines. And just be honest, like especially black folks, we've been disenfranchised and for so long, you think, oh, this is not about to happen in Alabama. And so it was a welcome surprise.
Yeah, it was a welcome surprise. And the last time the lawsuit was brought under the Voting Rights Act, and the last time a case that was brought from the state of Alabama under the Voting Rights Act went up to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court ruled against the people and essentially gutted Section 5, some of what they call pre-clearance rules related to the Voting Rights Act. So there was not a lot of optimism in some circles about the prospects of this case. Because look, at the end of the day, this case was about whether or not the state of Alabama drew their congressional districts in a way to dilute the power of the black vote. And a lot of people were not optimistic that it would happen, especially given the current makeup of the Supreme Court. And it went before a 3-judge panel down in Alabama first. That's the way Voting Rights Act cases are heard. They do them before a panel, not just a single judge. And 2 of the 3 judges that were on that panel were actually appointed by President Trump. And the third was appointed originally by Ronald Reagan and then later elevated by President Clinton. There was not a lot of optimism, but the court, they took their time. They listened to the facts. They reviewed the evidence. They heard from experts. They heard from witnesses, and they ultimately made the decision that the state of Alabama had indeed carved up their districts in a way that diluted the power of the black vote, and they ordered the state to redraw the maps. And the state appealed all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court, like I say, to many people's surprise, they agreed with the...
A little justice working for us.
Look at that, man. Justice. It was...
Representative justice. Like I said, I think Alabama, when people hear Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, the Deep South, and I love that narrative to change, to think that change can't come and can't start in places like Alabama. And I think you're running a race in a state like that with the experience you have both in the state and in D.C. represents some of that new change and new leadership that people can really get behind. To that point, so there's a new district. It's never existed at this makeup before. My understanding, some of the biggest cities there would be Mobile and Montgomery.
Correct. Pieces
of those cities there. And you have an interesting family history with your mother and father in the state. And I think this is almost like and you're the middle child?
I am.
Middle child. And I'm curious why you have an older brother or sister?
I have older brothers, and my dad has 4. 3 with my mom. My dad had one oldest son.
And none of them, are any of them in politics or in?
One, my oldest brother lives here in D.C. He actually is. He's been in and around politics for 2.5 decades or so. He's worked in the labor space here in the D.C. area, in the teacher space, and is now over in the enviro space. And so he's very much so active and involved in it. My other brother's not so much.
Okay. So going back to Alabama, getting this D.C. experience and bringing some of this energy and knowledge back home, like, why now? Like, what sets you apart? Like, how are you going to win? Because if you're not running just to be running, you're running to win, running to represent the folks. But it's a crowded field. I'm hearing, 9-10 people in this Democratic primary?
Man, I wish it was 9 or 10. It's 13.
It's 13 now? Oh, okay. My info was off.
No, it's...
so you up against 12 other people.
Yeah.
What gets you and your rises to the top? Like, why people are checking off Shomari Figures after those instead of those other 12 names?
Yeah, in terms of the why now, look, you know what President Obama used to say to us, man, that we are the ones that we've been waiting for. And if not us, then who? And if not now, then when? And I chose now because of, obviously, everybody in this race chose now because how this court case turned out. But in terms of where I am in my career, man, like I most recently served at the Department of Justice. I was at the Department of Justice when this case was argued and when this case was won, and I've been able to take a look just at my career and the experience that I've been able to gain just across federal government, not just with DOJ, but also as a federal law clerk and also at the White House and my previous tenure at DOJ, but more importantly, when I was in Congress. I'm the only candidate in this race who actually has served or worked in federal government outside of the military. And I think that matters here because we cannot afford to send a candidate to Washington, D.C. that has to spend 2, 4, 6 years learning on the job, how to get things done, building relationships, building alliances, figuring out which are the best committees and where you can build the best relationships to actually bring the tangible assets back to this district for the benefit of the people. And so I think knowing how government works and having relationships here in Washington already are a significant asset that I bring to this race. And I'm hoping that people will see that and value that. From what we've heard on the trail, that's something that they're actually that resonates a lot with them, is that people actually having a candidate that we can count on going to Washington and not just having to learn how government works. Because this case is still not final. Like, at the end of the day, this case is still very much so in its preliminary phases, and it's a lot of the case left. So we don't know what this district is going to look like in 2 years, 4 years, let alone 2
So
years.
There's a chance Alabama 2 goes away, or is it just that it shifts?
There's a chance that it could, right? Because the case was not resolved fully. The case is still very much so in the early phases of it, and we have to see what the state of Alabama does next in terms of pursuing the case. But I think the Supreme Court has spoken on the underlying issue as of now, but there are still other challenges that are under consideration. So I think we're certainly in a great spot. I don't want to sound the panic alarm, but the realities of it are that, like, it could change, right? Under different legal theories, under different arguments, the case could be reconsidered. But at a minimum, we know that in 6 years, come January, there's another census. And after that census, we're going to go through this song and dance all over again. Fortunately, we will begin at that time with the spot of where we are now, in all likelihood. But this is something that we're going to have to deal with again. And at that point, the reason the census is so important is because it takes into consideration what the population shifts have been. And so we don't know what that's going to look like. So it could very well result in this district being modified to some degree. But for me, it's about experience, first and foremost. It's about knowing Washington. Secondly, it's the commitment and dedication piece. There are 13 candidates in this race, at least as of the time of recording. There are 13 candidates in this race, and several of them do not live in the district. Several of them are not from the district. Several of them have no tangible connections, or certainly no recent tangible connections to the district. We actually have candidates in this race who live closer to Ohio than they do to Mobile. And that is
closer to Ohio than Mobile. Does that mean do they live in Alabama?
Yeah, they live in northern Alabama and are running for a southern Alabama congressional seat.
Okay.
And and that's relevant and that matters, right? Because I think you need to be of the communities that you're seeking to represent. And it's not that they're bad people. It's just that you can't connect with people that you don't live around, that you've never lived around, and that you're not willing to make the sacrifice to live around as you're campaigning for this election.
Speaking of that, I've noticed, like I said, you've in some of the interviews and even in this conversation, like you're really much so standing on your own experience. But I think politics, especially elected politics, it both can be a career, but it's more of a calling. You look up people who've been serving for 20 and 30 years. That's by all measures and means a career. Yeah. But I still think it's a calling. I speak a little bit about the family history and of Alabama with your dad and your mom and how that has passed on, maybe some lessons you've learned, because I think that's also a point of experience. Like you spoke a lot about the Washington experience and an observation there, but you still are, all politics are local. Yeah, that's one of the old adages in politics, and so having a deep multi-decade local connection to any place that you or any group of people that you're hoping to represent, I think is important. But I'm curious to what maybe you've picked up or were able to see with your parents in the roles that they played and how that translated to and informed how your POV of how this should be done.
Yeah, it starts with that commitment and that dedication to public service. That is something that was embedded in me and instilled in me from my parents. And like the entirety of my life, both of my parents were in public service. My father integrated University of Alabama's law school and then went on to do a lot of civil rights work in the Black Belt area of Alabama, working to protect some land rights for blacks. We were talking a little bit about the once he came back home after law school. He was obviously one of the few black lawyers in Southern Alabama at the time, the only one who had gone to law school in the state of Alabama. And he devoted his career to that civil rights space in the legal side of his career. And ultimately, my dad ended up filing the lawsuit that bankrupted the Klan, the United Klans of America, after they lynched a 19-year-old kid in Mobile in 1981. And my father was in the state senate by then. My father got elected to the state senate as one of the first blacks from Southern Alabama to be elected to the state house since Reconstruction. And he stayed in that Senate seat until his untimely death in 1996. The pushing for a lot of changes. My father was heavily involved in the civil rights space, and he was also involved in the case that changed the current city government structure in my hometown. Like there, as was reflected across many southern states and cities across the country, there was a time where there was not this city council district sort of structure for city government. It was like a city manager sort of system, and you had city representatives that all ran citywide. So in a city that was anything less than 50% black, you'd never have black representation at the city government level. And so they brought a lawsuit to challenge that. Ultimately went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and they won. And the city of Mobile, as well as several other cities in the state of Alabama and throughout the South, adopted what is now a very common mayor city council district, where the mayor is the only person who runs citywide and the city council people run in districts. All legal challenges that they brought, that sort of post-civil rights movement wave of civil rights litigation. My father was instrumental in a lot of that in the state of Alabama. After he passed, my mother, who was on the city council at that time, she ran and she was elected to the state senate and has been in that seat since then. My mother has worked on a variety of issues, from healthcare to education, and really focusing on just making Alabama a better place. And
so seeing that, that's in your household.
Yeah,
and it's in your blood. It's in your bloodline. How did that? And I think it shows in some of the jobs and the opportunities you've chosen to pursue. But now going back to represent people, I'm curious, especially at a relatively young age of this. And I think there's this new wave of younger, and by younger, 20s and 30s, maybe even early 40s, of folks who are getting into the system and running for offices from Congress down to city manager and everything in between. Yeah. But I'm curious, what's one like nugget you picked up from them in terms of what it means to represent people?
Yeah, you got to show people you care. Right? You got to show people that you actually care about the things that matter to them. And you have to show up for people. You got to be there. You have to listen to people, and you have to actually show people that you are as vested in making their life better as they are in bringing their issue to you. And I cannot tell you how many phone calls, meetings, community meetings, church meetings, constituency meetings that I've sat through as a child growing up with my parents, because they were there to listen and hear and learn and ultimately figure out how to actually address some of the concerns that people were bringing to them. And I think overall, man, what you learn when you grow up in the home of people who have been in public service so long, I think you really learn, or it really just becomes something that you just organically gravitate to, is that your life is not yours when you're in public service, right? Like your life is
I feel you. I know exactly what you mean.
Yes, it's you're signing up to give the best of you, or what should be the best of you, for the betterment of your community. And when you do that, you sacrifice a lot of privacy, a lot of family time, a lot of self-time.
No, man, we're in similar boats. Like I said, my dad is a United Methodist bishop now. He's been a pastor my whole life. He was in seminary school when I was born. I'm the oldest. In my conscious life, he's always been a pastor, community leader. My mom, eventually full-time either community organizer and or faith-based organizer and counselor, and always the first lady, but leading initiatives and then over-indexing in anything that helped youth. And when you just, people always, it must be really hard at the house. Like they're always drilling this into you, or and it's, no, actually my parents are pretty cool. My dad's he's like a comedian outside of, he's still my dad. But to your point of sitting in on meetings, I'm going to, you got to show, I totally identify with you, and like showing, you got to show people you care and showing up. And I don't know if I was consciously learning this, but I went to, I don't know how many hospitals with my dad just going in to check in on the sick and the shut in, or you're sitting in on these community meetings. Hey, this is what we got to do. Or you've done a few different protests, but when I guarantee you, I didn't know what the true issue was, but being able to ingrain and see that, like when you're in the household, it organically comes to you that your life is not yours, really. You're here. It becomes that's the normal. Yeah,
it becomes your normal. It's obviously like your parents. They are there for obviously all the big moments, but it's still a grind, man. It's still a lot of time where parents not home, parents are on the road, parents are in meetings, parents are, in my case, in Montgomery. In fact, the day my dad died, or the day he collapsed at the house, he had literally just gotten off the road from Montgomery. And it's you grow up with that sort of understanding that your folks when you're a kid, it's like the work takes you, oh, mom's at work, daddy's at work. But once you come into your own, you understand that work for them is for everybody, right? And so it's just a commitment that you have to be prepared to sign up for. And so it's something, for me, it's the norm, right? So that certainly won't be an adjustment. And that's the case, I can say, for a lot of the candidates in this race. Like many of them are currently elected officials. It wouldn't be an adjustment for them in that respect, but it's still a level of commitment and dedication that's necessary. Even more amplified in this congressional race because the district is so big. And this district spans from Mobile up to Montgomery and then all the way over to the Georgia border. So it literally spans the entirety of the width of the state of Alabama and the southern-ish part of the state. And so because of that, you got to sign up, and you got to be committed, and you got to be dedicated to getting out to places like Phoenix City, Alabama, and Eufaula, Alabama, and Troy, and Tuskegee, and Montgomery, and Jackson, and Union Springs. Like it's a lot to touch. Greenville, Evergreen, it's a lot to touch to show people that you care.
It's a lot. Switching gears a little bit, but something like, especially germane to this audience, is that I think we are in a shift, which is interesting given you got President Biden, the oldest president, or potentially older. He's technically not the oldest president to serve. He would be the oldest president if reelected at that time. I think there's been one other like 80-year-old president.
That'd be Reagan.
Reagan, yeah. But it was in office.
Okay.
But semantics.
Yeah.
Older president. And there is especially in Congress, you've seen a shift, at least perceived shift in terms of people feeling like, hey, man, sometimes these members have been here too long, or they're just older. There's the back and forth, because I'm one of those advocates for experience, especially having worked in Congress specifically, knowing how long it takes to get legislation done. Maybe some would argue, like, why does it take that long? We need to fix the rules so things can change more nimbly. But that's not the case as it is now, and it's a body of 435 plus people, and you have to build coalitions, that you have to build relationships, you have to understand other people's issues in areas of the country. Like, it's just a lot of consensus building, a lot of teamwork, both parties, and even back in the day when you could still get a lot more bipartisan stuff done. But the thing that I think we saw last cycle, and we're definitely going to see in 2024, is so many much younger faces, more diverse faces, more black candidates, more Latino candidates, more Asian candidates, more people, first-generation Americans, more first and second-generation Americans. Like, there's just a different wave. Like I said, younger folks. So you got way more people in their 20s and 30s running to be that future. And I think there's a push and a pull right now where some folks, I'm curious, like, you being of this new wave and kind of can represent that, especially in a state like Alabama. I just don't want it to be lost on people, like how important it would be to have a young black brother in a state like that, especially given that some of the Republican colleagues that'll probably be there, that you'll have to then talk to me about what that represents, like what this new energy and new age of not just candidates, but they also need to get elected, and what you hope to add to that, and nationally, because like Congress, even though you're running locally, Congress is still a national federal body, and so you quickly can catapult into a role model and a leader that people can look to from all around the country, even if you're only representing Alabama. You got the Akeem Jeffries to the Terry Sewells of the world. People know these people all over the country. But I think it's an important shift. Like I'll frame it this way. This year marked the 50th anniversary of hip hop, and I always tell people, like, this is why it's important that this new hip hop generation gets involved, because at 50, that's what we in politics and campaigns like to call like a high propensity voter. That's when you finally have matured to a place to take that next step where you're constantly involved. Now that we have a community, a culture that has touched everybody around this country and is matured, I think it's sprouting up people like yourself who look different, who not look different, but who are not the norm, but they represent a new energy and a new way to look at this. And I'm curious how you see that and how you see that playing out over the country, what that represents, what this new shift and this new wave of leaders, of potential leaders and leaders represents.
Yeah, look, I think it's always a good thing when you have people that represent a broad variety of backgrounds, of ages, of experience types, even experience levels to a degree. I think it's always a great thing when you have a variety of people that voters can consider. I think in order to be effective, I think you're right. You definitely want someone that is experienced, but I don't necessarily think that's always going to be reflected in terms of age, right? I'm a big quality of experience guy.
Quality over quantity. You could have been there 30 years. If you ain't never got a bill passed.
Exactly.
You never got a law passed. What you doing?
Yeah, and a lot of the people in Congress now, like in our generation, we forget that a lot of these names have been around for a while. They came in when they were young too, right? And they were the us of their generations. And you can't forget that, because a lot of them have experienced an America that we only read about or were told about. And so I think we always have to be mindful of that. But at the same time, we grew up different. I was speaking to a group of kids down in Alabama in Montgomery a couple of weeks ago during some events around the Rosa Parks anniversary of the bus boycott. And what I said to them was this, that they're always told by adults to listen to us, all right? Listen to what we're telling you. And it's right. But in this space, we have to remind ourselves to listen to them too, because none of the adults in the room know what it's like to go to high school now, to go to middle school now, to come of age even in this era of hip hop culture. Like, we didn't grow up in it. We didn't grow up fully immersed in what social media is today and the internet and how information is shared and received and processed today, and having all the answers for good things and access to all the good and bad like in the palm of your hand, right? It's a different experience for them. And so the point I was making to them was that I ask parents to listen to you too as they inform their own choices around how they plan on voting or being involved in the community, because if you're only informed by your own experience, then you're literally only informed by the past. If you're not listening to the next generation that's coming up and learning how they are experiencing this world that we are attempting to govern, then I feel like you're setting yourself up for stagnant leadership, right? You got to look back. It's not like looking back technically. You got to look forward at this next generation that's coming up. And so I think people that are currently in elected positions, whether it's at the state level, local level, or federal level, I think there's an obligation for all of them to do the same. And so I think we also have an obligation amongst our era to step up to the plate with those new ideas, with that new sort of representation, and letting them know like how we feel about these things, while not being, obviously not being ungrateful and certainly not being disrespectful, to an older generation, but absolutely valuing, showing them that you value and appreciate and are very grateful for the things that they've done, but also making it known that, hey, we got some pretty good ideas too. And,
we here, we run it.
And I tell you this, like you've looked at a lot of voter data and election data throughout your life and career. One thing is always consistent is that in elections, the young people are the loudest in terms of the voices that you hear. We are always the loudest. But on election day, we are the quietest. When you look at the different age brackets of who actually shows up to the polls and actually votes, there are more people over 55, over 50, in a lot of cases over 60 who go vote than people under the age of 35, under the age of 40, which is, you can draw whatever conclusions you want about that, right? But one thing that we can't draw the conclusion that young people don't care, right? It's not that younger generations don't care. You can log on Facebook or Instagram right now and see how much they care about the political issues that are happening throughout the world. But what we have to do, I think, better as a generation, as a younger generation, is channeling that energy and that interest and that care and that concern into the voter box, right? To actually go and vote, to try to produce some of the changes to do that. And I personally think the best way to do that is by people who are of that generation and from that generation stepping up to the plate saying, look, we're here. Again, we are the ones that we've been waiting for. And if you want this generation to be represented, if you want what we're out there protesting for and demanding change about to actually come to fruition, then let's put one of us in office and go from there and see how it goes. Let's give one of us a chance. And so that's how I see it.
I think we need way more than one of us. And I think we need it way more than just in Congress.
Yeah.
I think people get, to your point, giving us a chance to work together. I'm also not advocating everybody needs to be under 40.
Yeah, and we have several examples in Alabama that sort of help this, right? We have a mayor in Montgomery, Alabama, which is in this district, Stephen Reed, first black mayor ever elected in the city of Montgomery.
He's the first?
He's the first ever elected, unless they had one back Reconstruction era that I'm not aware of.
I didn't even realize. No.
He's certainly the first.
Shout out to Mayor Reed.
Yeah, he's certainly the first black post-Reconstruction, right? And he was just elected, I think, for the first time in 2019. Still of that younger hip-hop generation for sure.
He's a good brother. I've met him and hung out with him and had conversation with him.
Yeah,
He's a good brother.
Yeah, absolutely. Mayor Randall Woodfin in Birmingham is also another example. Not the first African-American mayor in Birmingham. I believe he's the third or fourth. But certainly was relatively young when he got elected, of a newer generation, of a hip-hop generation. and I think they've done a good job of setting that example of what younger black leadership can look like when in elected roles throughout the state. And so Alabama is not without examples, but this would certainly be of a different position. This would certainly be on the federal level, and both of them are the heads of city governments, two of our four largest cities in the state. But nevertheless, we have examples, fortunately, that we can look to in the state, and I think those examples, are another touch point for why people can be so interested, or should be so interested, of this particular generation and actually going out to the ballot box, because we have examples of what happens when we can actually put younger people in office there.
Thank you. Just one last question, and then one question we ask all our guests. You're going to a Congress.
Hopefully.
Fingers crossed, prayers up. Voters voting, whatever my camera is, voters voting. And to all the listeners, voters voting. Like, that's really how this happens. But Congress, like all people do when they turn on CNN, MSNBC, Fox, and see stalemates and see a lot of people run into their corners, a lot of fighting. It's one of the first times in, I don't know, not ever, but in recent history, you got the Santoses of the world being expelled. You got people being censured. This is on the Democratic side. You got the Speaker of the House getting kicked. This is a reality series, and I think so many people who are just learning about politics or really getting into and becoming aware, I think maybe even have a skewed view, or maybe not so skewed view, because it is what it is in there. So they're able to see that, but I think they're seeing a very broken and disjointed government, especially at the federal level. And you're hopefully signing up to go to that.
Yeah.
Give me my closing question. I would say, if it's hard to get things done in terms of the laws passed, but it's not hard to be a leader and find ways to have other tangible benefits both locally and nationally.
Yeah.
What's one thing, not the only thing, obviously you're going to try, I'm pretty sure you're going to have a lot of things you're going to do, but if you could tell people, like, you know what, this is one thing I really want to get done when I get to the U.S. Capitol, and if I'm able to represent Alabama 2 in Congress, in the House of Representatives? What's one thing? Because I know there's something. You probably got a few things in your head that you go to sleep at night, wake up, and are written out. But don't tell me all of them. I'm curious, like, what's one thing that you really know you want to get done, that you see a path to, I can get this done?
Look, it's a lot, man. That's a tough question to narrow it down to one. But I'll violate the rules and give it two. One from a legislative standpoint and one from a broader impact standpoint.
Okay.
On the legislative side, look, in the state of Alabama, if you're born in Alabama, you are expected to live about the shortest life of anybody born in the United States of America.
Wow.
You are only expected to live just past your 60s in the state of Alabama, which in 2023 is insane. That is crazy to me. Like 72, 73 years old is the life expectancy in the state for somebody born in the state of Alabama, which essentially means if you are born in the state of Alabama, you are expected to die essentially before any other Americans born anywhere else in this nation. That is, it blows my mind to say it. When I tell that stat to people, they give me the same look you just gave me, like that, just dumbfounded, right? And that's black or white, right? And I find it, I'm running for Congress because I believe in a lot of things, but I also am running for Congress because I don't believe in a lot of things. And one thing I don't believe in is that we live in a country where we can find hundreds of billions of dollars to fight wars. We found money almost 60 plus years ago or so, or a little shy of 60 years ago, to put a man on the moon. I don't believe we can find money to put a man on the moon, but we cannot find money to put a man or a woman in a Monroeville, Alabama, or Greenville, Alabama, in an exam room once a year, just to make sure they're not dying. When we do these town halls and we talk to people, I ask people, raise your hand if you knew anybody who you know that they didn't go to the doctor for years, and by the time they went, they were dealing with something that was too late to avoid or reverse. Everybody in the room, hands inevitably always go up. And the sad reality is that for most of those people who don't go to the doctors in their 20s and 30s and 40s and 50s, really until they become eligible for Medicaid, or unless they need to go to the emergency room, the reason that most of those people who don't go is because they can't afford it. They don't have insurance, because they don't work the jobs that offer insurance, or they don't make enough money to be able to purchase the insurance and still afford to live. They don't, they're obviously not Medicaid or Medicare eligible once you get in that age range, and they don't want the bill that's associated with going to a doctor for a checkup. But had they gone to a doctor, they would have at least gotten the knowledge, right, that, hey, blood pressure's high, you're on the path to hypertension, right? Sugar levels don't look good, you're on the path to being pre-diabetic or diabetic, right? They could have received that information and made those changes earlier in life, so by the time they did become Medicaid eligible, they weren't in a better position. Yeah, in a much better position. So I really want to see us get to a place in America where we can leverage our medical institutions, our healthcare, our health insurance industry, our community colleges, every asset that we have available to us to ensure that people can at least go to a doctor once a year and get a very basic checkup and very basic lab work to make sure they aren't dying. And I think that is something that can save this nation hundreds of billions of dollars, because it's much easier to pay for a checkup for somebody for 20 years than it is to pay for dialysis for a year, right? And so
it's way easier when it comes to the healthcare system on the early side and early detection. To preventative medicine is way more than supportive and medicine when the folks are already.
Absolutely.
So you want to get something to where nationwide, and definitely in Alabama, that everybody has a maybe expanded, where I don't know where that fits in, what laws that exist and where in the healthcare law or something, but to get it to a better place to where everybody is able to at least see a doctor once a year. Okay. So that sounds like that there's a legislative and financial opportunity component to that.
Absolutely.
You said also something on the more impact side.
Yeah, and the only last piece I'll add to that previous piece is that the state of Alabama, we got to figure out a way congressionally to further incentivize the state to expand Medicaid. Alabama is one of only 7 states that have yet to do it, maybe 6 at this point that has yet to do it. And we have to go above and beyond and figure out how we can make them do it, because that would expand healthcare access to some 300,000 plus people in the state of Alabama, which is not an insignificant number.
That don't have access to.
They fit in that Medicaid. Sort of that gap. They make too much to be eligible,
But it's not
currently,
really
but not
too much.
enough. But yeah,
And it's
not
not
enough
really
to buy
if-
private
yeah.
market health insurance. So we have to fix that. We have to figure out a way to do it, and we got to put our heads together and fix it. If anybody had the perfect answer, it'd be done by now, right? But it's not. So it's going to take a collaborative effort. But that's essential in the state of Alabama. But on the non-legislative piece, man, like something that hits close to home to me is, look, I have at every phase of life, I have lost friends to the streets, not just gun violence, but people who have made bad decisions in life or other circumstances. And there are the sad realities of it is this. When I say we are the ones we've been waiting on, that's not just a mantra that we can apply only in the elective politics space, right? I think we are also the ones that we've been waiting on to fix what have become generational issues of losing our youth. And I'm not talking about just dying, but losing our youth, whether it's to gun violence, whether it's to a life in the streets, or whether it's to
Prison system.
a prison system, or whether it's to just not taking advantage of opportunities in life and not being in a position now to be able to go out and be qualified for that job of the future, right? We collectively, that same younger generation of people going into your office, seeking office that you're talking about, I think we collectively, and I think hip hop culture collectively has an obligation to ensure that we are doing what we can to save our current and next generations in terms of building communities and support systems around us to make sure that we are not continuing to just siphon away talent, right, that could be going on to do so many great things across this country, certainly in the state of Alabama. We have to figure out a way to come together and to do that. And that's not just a federal issue alone, but there's certainly a role that federal government can play in doing that, right? I think President Obama acknowledged this as much like when he formed My Brother's Keeper. But it's so much more that has to be done and something that's built within our own communities, which is the plan for My Brother's Keeper. But we got to do it. We have to embrace that obligation. We have to embrace that challenge, because at the end of the day, I think it was Nelly used to say, we all we got.
We all we got. No, yeah, he did yell that out.
Yeah, and we got to do that, man. We do. We sincerely do.
Man, yeah, I appreciate that. And that is a collective and combined effort, and it's a lofty goal, but I think it's also a realistic and something that through culture, through politics, through people showing up, through engagement, through money, through opportunity, like we are on a path to be able to achieve that. I'm gonna close out, and this has been an enriching conversation. I don't realize how long it had been going, but with something a little fun and a little more get a personality.
Yeah.
People see you in the suit. For those who aren't watching but just listening, like he came with no tie. He's relaxed. This is I don't know him well, but I know this brother. My wife vouches for him. We worked on something, so I'm assuming he's like, all right, this should be a good. But something that I think you learn a lot about people through the music they listen to. Yeah. So the question I asked, this is we used to do the top fives. I feel like top fives, everybody does that now in something. So I've got a 2-part question to learn about you. You've got a playlist, or you got probably, whether you're curated, your workout playlist, you're going to the morning playlist, maybe you just got a catch-all on your Spotify's, your Apple's, your titles, wherever you choose to listen to YouTube music, wherever you choose to use music. I'm curious, what's a song that if you checked your phone right now, it's probably in your top 10 or top 15 or something that's on a playlist that people wouldn't expect, a hip-hop song that people wouldn't, a hip-hop song and or artist that people wouldn't expect you to be jamming out to.
Song. Oh man,
there's no wrong answer, or maybe it's not a hip-hop song.
I was gonna say, if you said non-hip-hop song, man, look, man, I love music, man. If it's
forget hip-hop, get a song that people wouldn't expect, or you think that might surprise folks. They're like, I'm really rocking out to this song. Or, this artist is heavy in my rotation that you may not expect. Or maybe it's just somebody you really want to shout out.
Look, not a song. There's a group. There's a group called, this will be on the surprising side, there's a group called St. Paul and the Broken Bones.
Never heard of them in my life.
Out of Birmingham, Alabama.
Okay. I see what you're doing.
Never heard of them. Never heard of them. Birmingham's actually not even in this district. It's not even in this district.
St. Paul and the Broken Bones.
The Broken Bones. The lead singer of that group, I think his name is Paul Janeway, something to that effect. Apologies, I'm mispronouncing it if he's watching. He will blow your mind in terms of how soulful his voice is. And there's a song called Broken Bones and Pocket Change that will probably be surprising to a lot of people. If they hear it, they'd be like, man. And if you listen to it for the first time with your eyes closed, don't look at it. and then open your eyes and see him. It's a shocking experience. I'll play it for you when we wind down here.
Okay, say that. Then say
St. Paul and the Broken Bones,
Broken
Alabama.
Bones.
They'll surprise you.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, but I don't know, man. In terms of hip hop song that would surprise you that I'm listening to, it's probably a little too.
No, I get it. You running. I'm gonna save you. I'm gonna save you.
No,
I think that time is come and gone. Last thing, the other thing we ask: you stuck on an island. You stuck on an island for a year.
Yeah.
You can only take 3 albums.
Oh man.
I'm gonna give you albums, not artists. Albums.
Okay.
What 3 albums are you taking? Rock out for 1 full year.
For a full year.
Only 3.
Only 3. Wow. Hip hop. I'm assuming for the purposes.
No. It's maybe one. Mine might be 2 and 1. But yours might not be in it.
Can you do a greatest hits?
See, the first one to do that. But I'll give you the greatest hits because like when I think about Jay-Z's greatest hits or Jay-Z the hits, it came out too early to where he had extra hits. He got extra hits that came after that. So you can do greatest hits.
Look, if I could do greatest hits, man, I think I have to do ooh, man, that's a tough one, man. I thought you were gonna ask me like top artists. Let's see. 3 albums I would take. Look, I am geographically loyal to the South, so Juvenile, 400 Degrees.
Ooh.
I'm taking with me.
Okay.
All right, that's my Southern album. That checks the hip hop box. I'm also I would probably take Jay-Z's greatest hits. I could do that.
Give you a little motivation,
or maybe Andre 3000's greatest hits.
He don't have a greatest hits, so that you can't make up albums.
Greatest verses.
You can't make up albums that don't exist. I would take this person's greatest.
Oh man, that's a tough one, man. But when you're not in the rap mood, you gotta have something when you're not in the rap mood, man. So to that extent, I'll probably do Lauryn Hill's Miseducation, Lauryn Hill.
That's good. That gets you. It's several different vibes on that one.
Yeah, several different vibes on that one. So I think I'd do Juvenile, 400 Degrees, Lauryn Hill, Miseducation of Lauryn Hill. And I think you got to go with Tupac greatest hits, man.
I was actually thinking
or either that or All Eyes on Me, one of the two.
I would probably, if I had to choose between the two, I would choose actually All Eyes on Me because there's some songs on there that won't make his greatest hits album, but Can't See Me. Yeah, maybe I Ain't Mad at You might be on his greatest hits, but he's got to just Picture Me Rolling. Yeah. That's my favorite Tupac album.
Yeah, and you get to cheat. There's a double disc, right?
Double disc. Which in this new day of streaming is no longer like a cheat because people are dropping these 30-song albums for 30 songs, 2.5 minutes. So they double disc, but then they still. So you would do 400 Degrees.
Yeah.
Miseducation of Lauryn Hill, and you're saying Tupac All Eyes on Me or the Tupac greatest hits. Because the greatest hits, you do get some more inspiration in there.
Do, man. He had so many variations of greatest hits, though.
No,
man,
he's got his greatest hits. If you look, his greatest hits, if it's not Diamond, it's close to it. There's a double disc greatest. Yeah. There's a double disc greatest.
I'd probably go greatest hits.
Yeah, get the full mix of Tupac.
Yeah, that's tough. But yeah, that's what I probably do, man. I'll probably go with those. But look, man, one thing I'll say about hip hop, man, and how it just relates to just politics in general, man, is that hip hop is, if people actually really care about solving the issues in certain communities and in certain spaces and certain types of issues, listen to the music, because it is and it has always been, for many of the artists, a reflection of the circumstances and the environments in which they grew up and in which they live. And within that, you'll be able to identify and assess problems through an entirely different lens if you just take the time to stop criticizing what you hear on the surface level with a lot of songs and listen to what they're actually saying or trying to say. I think everybody can learn a lot.
Shomari, thank you. Good luck in your race. Where can people find you? Online?
Yeah, absolutely.
If they want to donate, if they want to help, if they just want to learn more about your platform.
Yeah, you can visit the website at figuresforcongress.com. That's my last name, Figures. The word for, FOR, Congress, CONGRES.com. You can find us on IG and Facebook under the same Figures for Congress.
Okay, I'll make sure, and this is out when we put clips out and we put this out. That is all there.
Absolutely, man.
Well, brother, thank you. Congratulations.
Appreciate it, man.
You're already doing a lot more. Just even being able to put yourself out there and put your family out there to be able to go for this is already a major step. And wish you the best of luck. Thank you for joining Hip Politics today. It was really good to learn a little bit more about you and about what you represent and what you hope to do. Good luck. And so with that, Hip Politics family, we're out.
Hip Politics, baby.